Hello and welcome to a brand new edition of Smart Money. It's Friday and we're back with your favorite masterclass on several things, and this week we're going to talk about fixed income investments. Now it's a topic that not too many people are familiar with, but everyone wants to know about. How can you make money using debt instruments? I'm not talking about debt mutual funds, but other fixed income instruments. Which are the ones to invest into, which are the ones to strictly avoid? All of this will be discussed, and of course your queries will be taken up as well in the next half an hour. My guest today is Mohit Gang of Moneyfront.in. Mohit, thanks so much for joining us. When we were planning this show, we were discussing how at the moment in this current environment where interest rates are low, where debt funds in any case are not giving you great returns, how does one really approach this space now? Should you stay away? Should you invest? What is the scenario currently?
Hi Sonia, good afternoon, and it's nice to be out here discussing a very relevant topic, though not very highly spoken about. So I'm glad that we are talking about this. Look, so repo rates have been down at around 4% for almost a year now, right? And the real interest rates in India are negative for a fairly long while. If you go to a bank, the deposit rate for a one-year product today will be roughly in the range of 5 to 5.5%, right? And it doesn't even take care of inflation. So on a real sense, an investor of fixed deposits is actually losing money or is not making much. He's like kind of flat. In that kind of a scenario, what are the avenues for one to enhance returns, right? But one has to really understand that the moment you try and take your returns on fixed income instruments beyond the risk-free rate, the risk actually increases in quite a magnified way, right? And so typically we are not talking of mutual funds. If you see the mutual fund yields today across the debt spectrum, the yields hover between 3 to 4.5 to at best 5% on the shorter end of the curve. So even in mutual funds, if one has to make returns, he has to do a credit play, or he has to bank on spread compressions or do a duration play, which is all fraught with challenges and risks, right? So the yields aren't very attractive. So then the only option left for a fixed income investor, and I'm not even talking of debt investors out here, I'm talking of fixed income investors who want a regular pattern of income basically and are willing to take some chance with their debt portfolio. So for those investors, we have an array of other products which could be utilized to enhance their returns, and maybe perhaps we can have a discussion around that.
I want to in fact talk about that in greater detail because in the last 10-15 days, I don't know what it is, but there's so many people have sent us requests asking us to explain what is P2P lending, what is invoice discounting, and I think a lot of these products are fraught with a lot of risk. So let's start first with all the options available and then we'll talk about the risks. Mohit, what are the options right now for a fixed income investor?
Okay, so if we go up the ladder beyond the mutual fund space, the first thing you can look at investing is bonds. There are all kinds of bonds which are available. There are tax-free bonds, taxable bonds, there are bank bonds, PSU bonds, there are private company bonds, right? And then there are details around these things. Then you go up the ladder and you can perhaps invest into structured notes, which will have any underlying derivative. It could be a fixed income instrument as a derivative. It could be Nifty as a derivative, or it could be something else. Most of these structured notes will typically principal protect or will at least say that the instrument is principally protected, and then will perhaps give you a kicker on the return, right? But those are all 25 lakh ticket sizes and beyond, so perhaps we can keep it for some other day. You also have alternate investments funds, which are long short funds typically, which are kind of hedging portfolios, but they come at a ticket size of 1 crore and above, so those could also be a different day discussion. And then, as you rightly said, today, a lot of investors are looking at P2P lending, which is peer-to-peer lending, and invoice discounting programs or invoice discounting platforms, because these come at an affordable ticket size. So even you and I or anyone with a smaller ticket size today can just go ahead and invest with the aid of technology. But there are challenges and there are risks involved, and which we can perhaps discuss during the course of the show.
Sure. So I just want to go over what you said. So the different kind of avenues in debt fund investing, there are bonds, there are market linked debentures, but those are of course 25 lakh and above. So I don't know, it may not suit all retail audience. Long short AIFs are like 1 crore and above. So the ones which are small and affordable are basically bonds, 10 lakh ticket size, P2P lending, which is also small and affordable, and invoice discounting. But we do want to put it on board that some of these are fraught with risks. We'll talk about that risk in a bit. Let me first start with bonds. Can you explain the different types of bonds that are available for a lay investor, retail investor to get into? What are the typical returns compared to, say, what one would get in an FD? And what are the risks that investors should be careful about while investing in bonds?
Absolutely. So look, there are many kinds of bonds. If we go by the type of issuers, so there could be government bonds or there could be private sector bonds, right? Government bonds are tax-free or taxable. Tax-free bonds, government have stopped issuing fresh lots since 2015, but there are bonds which are available in the secondary market. One can go and buy it out on the secondary market. On the tax-free bonds, the yields are not very attractive though, but these are tax-free yields. So it is roughly hovering in the range of 4.5% today. But the good part is this is attractive opportunity for HNI or ultra HNI investors who are in the highest tax bracket. So if you are in a 33% tax bracket or a 43% tax bracket, right, let's super HNI tax bracket, then this becomes an attractive opportunity because the pre-tax yield roughly comes at around 8%. And these are very, very liquid, good names, all government backed, PFC, REC, NHAI, IRFC, those kind of issuers, right? So that's the tax-free zone. Then comes the taxable bonds. Government issues a lot of these taxable bonds across the similar entities now. And even you have RBI bonds and so on and so forth, but the yields are not very attractive. Then you have private sector bonds, which are issued by private banks or the PSU banks also. Those could be in the form of additional tier 1 capital, which is called the AT1 bonds, or those could be in the form of AT2 bonds or the tier 2 bonds, which are called, right? Now, when you talk of AT1 bonds, you have to also understand most of these are perpetuals or the perps. Now, there are multiple risks which are involved in these things, so the interest rate offered is fairly attractive and fairly high. Just to give you an example, Sonia, on the perpetuals or the AT1 bonds today, the bank bonds, the yield will be anywhere in the range of around 8% to going as high as almost like 11%, right? It will depend on the name of the issuer, the quality of the paper, the credit rating of the paper. But the risks involved with perpetuals are very high. We have seen that recently in the case of Yes Bank, RBI kind of zeroized the entire outstanding perpetual book, and all the bond investors were left with actually zero capital. Actually, they lost the entire capital in that case. So the risks are high. The rate of return is fairly high. One has to understand that in perpetuals, the company who's issuing can forego paying the interest payment if they run into losses, right? So it is like a quasi equity instrument. The returns are fairly attractive and fairly high. So if you go in for a perpetual bond of, let's say, Bank of Baroda or an SBI or an HDFC or an ICICI, those are good names. You can still take a quality call out there with a slightly higher interest rate. Look, HDFC bank deposit might fetch you 5 to 6%, but an HDFC perpetual bond will today fetch you over 7% or somewhere in that range, right? So there is a difference. And similarly with all bank perpetual bonds. And you have additional tier 2, which are more secured in nature, basically, and the rate of return is slightly lower than the perpetual bonds, but they at least are on the seniority aspect, they are senior to the perpetuals. They are senior. So that's called additional tier 2 bonds, but they work in a similar fashion, basically. So that's on the bond part of it. Now you also have private corporations who issue these bonds. So you have a Shriram Transport Finance, or you have a Manappuram Finance, or a Muthoot Finance, or other NBFCs like an Spandana Spurti, whose bonds today are quoting at almost like 11% yield, right? You have an Asirvad Microfinance, which is a Manappuram group company. The bonds are quoting at 10%. So there are attractive names. One has to be credit conscious. One has to be conscious of the quality of issuers, basically. And if you are comfortable with a particular name and the credit worthiness of that issuer, you can actually go in for these high paying bonds, and they can really enhance your overall fixed income returns.
So you spoke about how, I just have a follow up here, you spoke about how some of these bonds, corporate bonds like Manappuram, etc., have a 10-11% rate of return. What are the risks associated, and how does one as an investor, how do you look for those risks? I mean, where do you get to know what is the credit worthiness of these companies? What are the risks that you need to be aware of before investing?
Yeah. So look, Sonia, it's not Manappuram. Manappuram is actually quoting quite low, but it's a group company of Manappuram, which is Asirvad Microfinance, which is 95% owned by Manappuram. So these are the things which one has to know actually. So the issue issuer in this case is Asirvad Microfinance. The bond is quoting at almost 10 odd percent. It's a 2026 maturity bond with a monthly payout. The risks are fairly high because it's a microfinance company. Look, everyone saw what happened last year, right? The collection rates were not very high across the microfinance industry. There were moratoriums, there were interest defaults, payment defaults, and so on and so forth. So when these companies are into business of lending, smaller ticket loans to smaller SMEs or smaller individuals, right? So there could be high chances of defaults and credit defaults, and that's the reason why the rates are so high. If the businesses were simple and normal businesses, right, the rates wouldn't have been so high. So the only way to actually assess the risk is to go look at the company's pedigree. The promoter's integrity is of prime importance out here. The credit rating. So is it what is the credit rating? Is it a AA CRISIL paper, A plus CRISIL, or what kind of credit ratings are actually rated? Sometimes you might just find some unknown credit rating agencies rating the paper, and that's a red flag. You can perhaps make out that these are not the right things to go for, basically. So one has to be cautious on the quality of promoter, the balance sheet strength of the company, and what has been the track record. Look, the companies also can't take chance, because if they default or if they skip paying interest or something, their credit ratings could be downgraded immediately.
Because sure, sorry to interrupt you, because I'm getting a lot of queries coming in. I just want to toss one of them. It's relevant for the moment. Kunal Thakkar has written to us and he says, why are perpetual bonds of PSU banks being quoted higher than the fixed deposits of these banks? So for example, SBI, Union Bank, BOI, etc. It would be great if you can include this in your discussion too. So you said earlier that perpetual bonds are quoting higher purely because of the high risks involved. But if you just want to, go over that again for Kunal.
Yeah. So I think, Kunal, one has to understand the hierarchy of safety in these instruments. Look, perpetuals are like quasi equity. And I will again repeat that it is almost like an equity investment, basically, just a notch below that. So on seniority scale, you have secured bonds or secured debentures, then you have unsecured bond or unsecured debentures, and then you have subordinated debt, which is also called sub debt, and then you have perpetuals, and then you have preference shares. So that's the level of security. So secured is much higher and perpetuals are much low, because the risk involved is higher. In a deposit, the DGIC will guarantee you 5 lakh rupees, right? With any bank. In a perpetual, no one will guarantee you. They could be zeroized anytime if a company runs into losses, and even the interest payment could be skipped, right? So, and one has seen that happening in the country recently. So one has to be very, very careful in the name of the issuer in which you are choosing, and the quality of bank and the balance sheet strength. That's why the return is higher. Higher the risk, higher the return.
Okay. I was just going to say that. That's where high risk, high return comes from, right? That phrase. All right, Mohit, a lot of advice given us and pearls of wisdom over there. But we have to take a short commercial break. We're going to talk about those buzzwords, P2P lending. What is that really? Invoice discounting. So many of these terms thrown around. We're going to discuss all that and more on Smart Money in just a bit. Stay with us. Hey folks, welcome back to Smart Money on CNBC TV 18. We're having a very interesting discussion with Mohit Gang of Moneyfront on the various fixed income instruments that you can invest into, and more importantly, what you should stay away from because of the risks involved. So Mohit was telling us before the break about how perpetual bonds of banks, especially PSU banks, give you a very high rate of returns, but the risks involved are very high. The credit risks involved are very high as well. Mohit, when I was planning the show, I got a lot of queries on P2P lending and invoice discounting. I had half a mind to avoid discussing it because I know these are really fraught with risks, but I want to put those risks out on the table. So let's first explain to our viewer what P2P lending really is and what are the risks involved.
Absolutely. Sonia, just as usual disclaimer, basically, though I'm talking about these things, but doesn't mean that I'm in any which ways advising any of the viewers out here to go and straight up buy these products. You have to do a careful due diligence, and please consult your advisors and tax advisors and so on and so forth, right? So it's something which is absolutely risky before you venture into. Now, P2P lending, Sonia, just to understand it very simply, you and I, all of us have seen P2P lending when we were small childs. Our mothers or perhaps our grandmothers used to do that at a very unorganized level. So they used to lend money to our domestic helps or someone in a colony or mohallas or whatever, basically, and take some security. And that lending was done at perhaps 1% a month or 2% a month. Even I've seen my grandmom doing that a lot, basically, right? Now, what has changed between now and then is just that the technology has taken over. So the person who was lending is still there. He has the capital, he has the money, basically to give it to someone who requires that fund, and that someone could be anywhere in the country. He could be sitting in Cochin, he could be sitting in Kanyakumari, he could be sitting in Kashmir, he could be sitting in Sikkim, right? And the technology will connect the two people. Basically, technology will provide you all the details about the borrowers. They will tell you this is, and they will pool the borrowers. So they will tell you this is pool number A, which is high grade borrowers. They are salaried, they have good credit worthiness, their bank balances are good, their CIBIL scores are good, they have not defaulted, they own so on and so forth. This is pool B, pool C, pool D, in decreasing order of credit worthiness and increasing order of risk, right? Now, as a lender, you will go to this platform, you will select a pool, or you can even individually pick and select borrowers where you want to lend money. So let's say you put in ₹1,00,000 and you say, I want to lend this to pool C, which is medium risk borrowers, and perhaps basically that the rate of return out there will be 18 odd percent, and that is the profile. And you can individually select also. So your ₹1,00,000 will get divided into smaller denominations of 5,000 to 2,000 and go to across 20 borrowers, basically, right? So that's how the risk will get diversified, but the risk is unknown, the borrowers are unknown. Technology is getting the lender and the borrower together, and that's what peer-to-peer lending is all about. It's called P2P.
So I have many questions on this, Mohit. So you're saying that you are basically putting your money out there in the hands of borrowers who you may not know. You don't know their credit worthiness. You don't know, you of course know their CIBIL score, but I mean, who can really rely on that data, right? So is your basic premise or basic advice that one should stay away from P2P lending? What would you tell our viewers?
Okay, look, so it's a very careful and a cautious call, Sonia. Look, if someone really wants to play around with a tactical pool of money to enhance the return and wants to pick up a conservative basket, one can go ahead and do it. But be very, very cautious and careful that these are borrowers whom you don't know. You have never seen them personally and will never see them. If there is a default, you can't chase, you can't go after them. You don't have a legal recourse directly because it's a painful, tedious process of collection and so on and so forth, right? So you're relying on an intermediary, which is a technology platform, which will actually scan the entire geography and socio-economic status of the borrower and give it to you. Will give you all the bank details, the social conditions, the family size, the dependencies, everything they will show you. But finally, look, it's a pot of money which you're giving to someone unknown. So be very, very cautious. If you really want to dabble into it, try it with a very small sum, see how your experience has been. Basically, there could be scenarios like the moratorium last year, or scenarios where people actually go through pain, job losses, and they're not able to pay. So defaults are very common, very, very common. But because it's a large pool of borrowers, you will lend out to 20 people, 2 will default, 5 will default, 15 will pay, and you will not make 18, you will make 15%. So that's the mechanism on which this entire formula works, actually.
Okay, it seems like a very big risk and a very big gamble to me, right? Because you don't know who the borrowers are. And as you said, I mean, just going over the risks once again in P2P lending, because a lot of viewers get caught, or rather a lot of innocent retail investors get caught in this high rate of return. I mean, some people speak about P2P lending giving you 18, 25, and 30% returns, but there are so many risks involved. So there's no collateral taken A, it's an unsecured personal loan, there is no financial institution backing this, the recovery process is long and painful, collection efficiency is not great. So these are all the risks in P2P lending. All right. So that was very helpful, Mohit. What about invoice discounting? What does it mean and what are the risks involved here?
Okay, Sonia, broadly, it's an extension of what P2P lending does. Honestly, out there, you were giving it to individual borrowers. Out here, there are two companies which are involved. So let's say an XYZ corporation today produces a certain amount of goods, sells it to an ABC corporation. ABC corporation can be a big company, can be an MNC or something, right? And they will have their own payment terms. So they might perhaps pay after 2 months, after 3 months, after 4 months. No company pays immediately. You have to give them credit, right? If you have to sustain in the market, that's a very common practice in the market in businesses, that you have to lend out money or you have to give credit terms. Now the XYZ company which produced the goods, manufactured it, they require constant cash to fulfill their working capital. So they are in no way to they would want the money as soon as possible, and the buyer of the goods would want the payment to be delayed as much as possible. So both the ends are very different, right? So what will one do? The seller in this case, when he raises an invoice on the buyer, he will go and put out the invoice on a platform, again an invoice discounting platform, or go to a bank. Even banks do a lot of bill discounting basically, but banks will perhaps not touch very smaller SMEs and MSMEs and very smaller organizations basically, and that's where these platforms have mushroomed. So they will actually aid these smaller companies to come to them, put up their invoices for discounting. You and I, as financiers or as lenders of money, could go choose what corporates do we want to pick up, choose the invoices which we want to discount, against what kinds of goods have those invoices being raised, and then finally, let's say if the invoice was worth 1 lakh rupee, we deduct, let's say 15% commission. It's a 3-month kind of an invoice, so we deduct whatever 3,750 or whatever odd rupees and pay 96,250 to the seller. So he gets immediate working capital. He can kick off his business. He can produce his next shipment or whatever next tranche of goods. You make 15% return for 15% per annum return for 3 months put together. And when the payment is released by the buyer, that payment comes back to you. So that's the cycle. Now, just by listening to the cycle, you can make out there are many loose ends in the entire cycle, right? So there are many things which can go wrong in this.
Right? I mean, I feel invoice discounting seems to be a little more risky than P2P lending, because in invoice discounting, you're sort of putting your money in the hands of a business, and however good the company may be, however good the promoters are, at the end of the day, business cycles change on a dime, right? I mean, suddenly a pandemic comes through and businesses have just come crashing down. So would you advise staying away strictly from invoice discounting, or do you still see some potential here?
Look, Sonia, so this has been recognized by not the platforms I'm saying, but this practice of bill discounting. RBI has also given some form of credence to this practice. They have introduced a platform called Trends, which is trade receivables invoice discounting platform. And there is a platform called M1 Exchange, which RBI initially started with, where smaller MSMEs and SMEs can go and discount their bills, and financiers who can be large corporates or large individuals or HNIs or even banks can go and do the bill discounting program out there, right? Now, you have to understand one thing. The companies which are coming on other platforms or private platforms are the ones which have been refused by banks. They're not getting the invoice discounting or the bill discounting or the factoring part from the banks. They are too small in size, and that's the reason why they're going onto these platforms. So any which ways, those are in the highest form of risk, and perhaps the ones which are struggling for cash flows basically, and that's the reason why they've come onto these platforms. So the risk any which ways is exorbitantly high, which you are taking. You are relying on a contract of a service or a delivery of goods to be happening in 3 months. That contract can go wrong anytime. Perhaps you might not be able to produce the goods, ship it as properly. There could be quality defects. There could be some minor clauses in the contract which you don't know, which you're not aware of, which could result in delay in payments, which could result in a company deducting some amount while paying the final invoice, which could result in a company actually putting up some penalty clauses in something, right? So you don't know those things, those minor details or intricacies around the contract. So
absolutely,
obviously there is a lot of risk out here, and it's perhaps a zone which one should avoid.
Involved. All right, you know what? It was important. Okay, that's the most important thing, right? It's a zone that one should avoid. We have run out of time, Mohit, but it was really an eye-opener, this session, because, I mean, even me being in the market, I didn't have a clue on what really the intricacies of P2P lending, invoice discounting are. So thank you so much for explaining it to us in a very basic way and putting forward all the risks that are involved. as far as these fixed income instruments are concerned. Thanks a lot, Mohit, for joining us, and we hope to chat with you again soon. Well, with that, it's curtains down on another edition of Smart Money. Thanks so much for watching, and keep writing to us on what your preferred topics are that you would like us to do a masterclass on. All feedback always welcome. Until we meet again, thanks a lot.